Well, welcome to our ProCritique session. That's kind of a hard word to say.
It is.
ProCritique. I'm gonna have to work on that. But we're excited to have you guys here tonight. We've got 4 pieces that we are going to be talking about tonight. So my name is Brad Pauquette. I am the director of the company. I'm the author of the Novel Matrix book, and I am with Alli Prince, who is the author of Copper Lies, and she is formerly an apprentice at the company. Now she is here as a journeyman and as an intern at the company, helping us out and continuing to gain experience in publishing and writing and things like that. So this is a good time to mention your book, Alli.
Yeah.
Why should they go and check it out on Amazon right this very moment?
They should go check it out on Amazon right this very moment because it's on sale for 99 cents right now until Friday.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time we get this podcast posted, that's probably like right now.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely hop over to Amazon and grab a copy of Alli's book. So we are going to be critiquing 4 different pieces tonight. What are those pieces, Alli?
We have Lifesaving Lattes by McTernan. We've got a story from Kinsey, Holt, which is a novel chapter. We've got Calvin Loses the Girl by Scott Morehead, and we've got Worldturners by Kamryn Weaver.
Excellent. All right, so we're looking forward to critiquing all of these pieces. And the way this works is that these pieces are available on the website right now for download. They're only available to members of the company, and that just protects the privacy of the authors. But it's free to create a membership, and then you can jump in there, you can download the stories, and we encourage you to read the stories and prepare your own critique before you listen to our critique. That way you can kind of gauge, how perceptive are you to the quality issues that we're going to discuss, to the types of writing techniques that we're going to discuss. It's a good way to self-assess and a good way to challenge yourself to learn more in the process. So we really thank the authors who submitted their stuff. They are martyrs for the group in this way. That, of course, they get feedback on their piece, and we hope that that's very helpful to you as the author, but also they are willing to kind of be criticized publicly for the benefit of others. And so that's a very, very altruistic thing for you to do.
Brave souls.
So we are going to strive to be kind and respectful in our feedback. However, we're not going to hold back at all. The way that anybody improves in writing is by getting hard, constructive feedback. And so we're going to tell you all the things that you really need to hear about these pieces. We figure that you have enough people in your life, like your mother and your aunts and your grandma, who will read your stuff and tell you, "Oh, sweetie, that's just wonderful. Never give up." We hope that you have those people in your life. And really, I mean that those people are important to your writing journey. However, we also need people on the other side of the table who are going to say, "Yeah, it's okay, but here are ways that you can improve. Here's how you're not yet measuring up to the standard that you need to be reaching." So that's our goal for tonight. That's how we approach this. So with that, let's go ahead and pray, and then we're going to dive right into the first piece. So please pray with us. Lord God, I thank you so much for this time that you've given us tonight. And whether people are here with us live or they are listening to the recording later on, I thank you just that they would spend this time with us, that they would trust us with their time. And I thank you that these 4 authors would trust us with their pieces, Lord, and that they would, sort of enter into that agreement with us to make this valuable for them, but also valuable for the community. So thank you that they would take that risk and be willing to participate in that way. Lord, we welcome you into our conversation, and I just pray that you would be the glue that holds us together, and that you would also be the filter. Father, that you would help us to hear what you have in store for us. Lord, even in all the words that are said, Lord, that you would help us to focus on the things that are going to be most constructive and most productive in our writing. And I thank you, Lord. Pray that we would honor and represent you in this. And thank you, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so we're going to start with Lifesaving Lattes, right, Alli?
Absolutely.
All right, Alli, you want to read us the first couple paragraphs there?
Yeah, for sure. Ugh, could you be any slower? I risk a glance over my shoulder to look at the current angry customer. She's dressed in an expensive-looking coat and is staring daggers into the back of Jimmy, my coworker, who is fumbling to spray whipped cream into her mocha.
Excellent. Thank you, Alli. And so, of course, you can download this piece. It's listed as Lifesaving Lattes by McTernan on the company's website. So, Alli, This is a short piece. I
It is
guess we've
short.
got like maybe 600 words here.
Mhm.
And so that's definitely a factor in the way that we critique it. But what are your initial thoughts on this?
My initial thoughts on this one, I thought it was really sweet, the life-saving latte part of it,
Mhm.
but I felt like that was the only part of it. I really wanted more from this piece,
Yeah.
you know.
Like when you say you wanted more,
Mhm.
let's talk about that because
Yeah.
something that I often say is I want more is not necessarily criticism
Mhm.
because the opposite of I want more is I want less. And so oftentimes, like if we have a choice, we'd rather leave our reader feeling like, oh, I wish there was more of this, right? I wish it never ended.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's what you're saying here.
No,
So when
not
you
quite.
say I want more, what specifically are you talking about? Break it down.
So I think I want more like conflict in the
Mhm.
story. I didn't feel like this story had a bigger picture to it. I felt like he saved the girl and like that was it. It didn't leave me wondering anything about the main character or about what he might be going through internally or kind of like the overall big picture, like why was this story told? I
Yeah,
also wanted more physical descriptions.
yeah, for sure. Well, and so yeah, the story is very simplistic. It's sort of this action reaction story.
Mhm.
Or in some ways, it feels to me like the way that you would write a joke. So
Mhm.
typically, when you write a joke, you have a proposition and then you have a punchline.
Yeah.
And that's very much what this is. We have one
Yeah.
scene that is all proposition, kind of sets up this line that thanks, you're a lifesaver. And then we have a second scene that acts as the proposition that kind of punches it and returns to that refrain, you're a lifesaver.
Mhm.
So we do have that kind of simplistic structure. And like you said, there's not a lot of conflict that ties the two together.
Yeah.
And there is opportunity for conflict.
For
I mean,
sure.
we have a woman that's about to be murdered by being thrown off of a building. So surely there is something going on there that perhaps could have been better built into the story.
I'm wondering what happened in this poor girl's afternoon that brought her from a coffee shop to being thrown off a building.
I mean, it started so great with that pumpkin spice latte, right?
Yeah.
Just such a great morning, and then we come to that.
Mhm.
I think it's interesting that we start out, and I really don't have a story gap until this line on page 2
Mhm.
that says, "If only she knew." So when I say story gap, what I mean by that is when we're critically reading a story, we're looking for instances in the story that open up a question that hasn't been answered yet. That's typically what draws your reader through a story. Something is introduced that we don't know how it resolves, and so now we're curious and we're connected to the story. And an effective story gap can get us through a lot of prose. In fact, if you write beautiful prose and you want people to wade through that with you, which can be a good thing, of course, but then we need really strong and effective story gaps to actually pull them through that piece so that they stick with us. And so in this case, while it is kind of a simplistic story, we really don't open a story gap. I'm really not curious about anything until that moment, if only she knew, on page 2. And in that regard, one thing that's typically important is to establishing the premise of the story is helping the reader to understand what genre we're working in. And here in this story, it turns out that we're in superhero genre. However, we really don't learn that until halfway through the last page 3 there.
Yeah.
The only thing that saves us in that regard is that story gap. If only she knew. I can tell that there's some connection to Lifesaver and if only she knew. And so that little story gap is enough to get me through it. However, it's a pretty thin wire that's holding me through the story.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was an interesting story gap.
Yeah.
For sure. It definitely took my interest. But it was like the only one there.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you wanted more physical descriptions. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I think we can start at the very beginning. We start with that, ugh, could you be any slower? And I don't really know who's talking there.
Right.
I have nowhere to ground me in the story. And eventually, like by the end of the first page, I can kind of picture a coffee shop, but I don't know how many people are in the coffee shop. I don't know how busy it is. I don't know the sounds, the smells. I don't know any of that stuff.
Right. There's not really a strong sense of presence in the story of like I'm in a very specific time and place, and these very real things are happening around me. And it's interesting that you mentioned that first line. Ugh, could you be any slower? So there's this rule, this often overstated rule that never start a story or start a chapter with a line of dialogue. And the reason is, of course, exactly what you were just saying, that the problem with starting with a line of dialogue is nobody knows who said it. We don't yet have any context. There's just a line of dialogue that hangs out in the vacuum. And I don't believe in following rules dogmatically, but we want to look at the purpose of the rule. And in this case, this falls exactly in line with the purpose of that rule. In this case, we just have this line of dialogue, and then the second line there doesn't even completely reveal who says the line. So even we need to get to the third sentence before we know who says this line at the beginning. And I'm always willing to break a rule if there's something that's just like so interesting or so enticing to justify it. But this line that we start with, ugh, could you be any slower, really doesn't bring enough to the piece to justify that confusion that I just described. If that line were really, really clever, really, really funny, or really, really enticing in some other way, I'd allow it. I'd say, okay, I'll stick with the confusion for a little bit because you've hooked me with something here. But that specific line really just doesn't bring enough juice to get me through the confusion in the beginning there. Alli, could you imagine the protagonist?
I couldn't. It really surprised me. I think it was page 2 or 3 when it turned out to be, I think it was a guy that is the protagonist.
Right.
And that really shocked me. I'd been picturing a girl this whole time, but I don't know why.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Why do you think you pictured a girl? Because this is a frequent, when we workshop things here at the company, this is almost always a factor, particularly if the author isn't writing a character of their own gender. So what do you think is going on there?
I think that's a really good question.
Thanks.
I think a lot of how the sentences are structured just kind of sound feminine to me. Kind of the details that the character notices, like the coat, and the fact that she suggests a pumpkin spice latte. That's a very feminine drink, classically. I'm not saying you can't enjoy a pumpkin spice latte.
Well, I don't.
Oh, well, there you
go. So that's conclusive there. Yeah, and it's interesting that there is something intuitive about our understanding of gendered narrators. And it's often something that we struggle to articulate or like find specific examples of why we think it's a man or a woman. But in most cases, like any given story, if we were to survey a bunch of readers, there's going to be vast consensus on what gender the narrator is. Again, for reasons that we can't fully explain, but there's just something that's very difficult about writing a narrator that is different from the author's gender. Some people are very good at it, like John Green, if you've read The Fault in Our Stars, is such a powerful example of somebody who can do that really well. But most of us tend to fall into the voice of the gender of the author for obvious reasons. And so it takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of practice to be able to write the opposite gender well. Which means that, as a general rule, especially as a beginning author, if you are writing in a gender that's different from your own, you need to get really explicit. You need to find ways to drop in really clear clues for your audience so that they can immediately make that connection. If the first sentence or two establish that the narrator was a boy, then the audience is going to proceed on that premise. And even if on that intuitive level it sounds a little feminine, they'll still accept it if that's what you introduce in the beginning. So we're missing that, and we really don't have any kind of description of the narrator at all, which of course is challenging to do in a way that's not cliche. They like see themselves in the mirror and the reflection of the whipped cream can or something like that. But nonetheless, we do need some of those details to work their way into the story, even if we got to be a little bit cliche in the way that we do that. And then I think that would bring a lot of clarity to the end of the story as well. So, I think probably the last note that I have is some of the writing is a little bit generalized, and I think you have opportunities for showing that you're not fully taking advantage of. So for instance, on page 3, we have a few lines that I'll I will point out. It says, "When I'm about halfway to the woman, she teeters and starts falling. Her ear-splitting shriek rushing adrenaline through my core." And that idea of rushing adrenaline through my core is an interesting idea. It's an interesting phrase, but it's not something that I can relate to on a sensory level. I mean, I know what it feels like, you know, when you're afraid and you get that feeling in your gut, but I'm not sure that this is exactly what that's describing. So I'd rather than focusing on this kind of like topical theoretical idea of adrenaline in my core, I'd much rather get a description of that feeling of, you know, intensity in your core. Another example would be below that, but she opens her eyes and nearly shrieks again when she sees that she is suspended in the air, not falling to her death. So that nearly shrieks again, same story there. Don't tell me what she didn't do. Tell me what she did do. So like, did her mouth open and gasp like a fish out of water, but no sound came out? You know, how can you really build that into a positive description where I can see something is happening, again, rather than telling me something that didn't happen, which is that she did not shriek. And then finally, that last paragraph there, she is probably trying to sort through the fact that not only is a flying man holding her, but that he's the barista she got a latte from earlier. So at this point, that information is pretty obvious to the reader. Like if we've been paying any attention at all, and it's not a long piece, so I don't think we've lost the thread. We should already, we're there with you. So rather than regurgitating or rehashing that information that we already have, I'd much rather see the piece give me a specific description. You know, as we are in a limited POV from the narrator here, but as he sees her face, there is something going on with her facial expression that causes him to draw that conclusion, that she is thinking through this and putting the pieces together. So what's going on with her face? Let us as the reader see the face, just like the narrator sees the face. And, you know, we're pretty smart and we've been paying attention to the story. If you show me the confused look on her face and you show me that twinkle of recognition in her eye and you give me really compelling details for that, I'll put it together. I'll put together that she is making this connection from the coffee shop to now. Alli, how about you? Any other notes for Molly?
I feel like we've pretty much covered all of it.
All right, excellent. I do want to note, like, the length of this piece makes me believe that it was likely written for something that had a strict word count limit. You know, like maybe some contest that was like a flash fiction contest or something like that. And that's tough, right? When you're trying to build a comprehensive story in a short amount of time. And so if that's the case, I do want to applaud you. You do have that proposition and punchline type of story. You have effectively achieved that. But nonetheless, I would love to see a greater sense of conflict that permeates the story from beginning to end and brings more depth to the story.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Molly, for sharing that with us. I'll probably say this 4 times tonight, but I do want to recognize that it takes real bravery to put your story out there and ask people for a critique. And so well done. I hope that this critique is helpful and you can take your story to the next level with it. So what do we got next, Alli?
We have a novel chapter from Kinsey Holt.
Great. You want to read us maybe the first 3 or 4 paragraphs there?
Yeah. Goats made for terrible monsters. Merrick flourished his staff again in front of the foolish creature's nose. "Come, taste of my steel, foul beast," the goat stated, then ambled back a few steps and started tearing up chunks of stringy mountain grass. With a sigh, Merrick plopped down on a boulder and leaned his head against the smooth wood of his staff. A gust of wind swept up the mountainside, carrying with it faint strains of music. Merrick sniffed, fancying he could smell roasted meat.
Excellent. Thank you, Alli.
Do you like my goat impression?
Yeah, I was going to ask, did you practice that
Nope.
ahead of time? Wow, that was really first class. You know, if this writing thing doesn't work out, you have a real future in animal noise impressions. So, Alli, as we were talking earlier today, you were quite fond of this piece.
I was.
Yeah, so tell us about it. What do you see that you really like here?
I really like how the story flowed.
Yeah.
I feel like when the now I don't know how to pronounce the bad guys. Let me find the Dahiyu. How do you say that? The Dahiyu.
Yeah, I think I started saying Dahira.
Dahira. Okay.
Dahiri, I guess. But let's stop there for a second. Okay. Can we talk about this?
Yeah.
Writing world, can we talk about this? I really have a strong preference for names that I can pronounce. And I've surveyed a number of readers on this. And what I've learned is that when people can't pronounce the names, They basically skip them.
Mhm.
And the problem with that is it violates the pretense of the story. So like when you start reading a story, we have that really cool experience where we enter into a hallucination,
Mhm.
right? Where we're reading and suddenly we're not reading anymore. I mean, we are, but we're like imagining the story in our head and we're absorbed in the story. And as best as possible, we want to preserve that hallucination. And the problem is that when I come against a name that I can't pronounce, I have to stop. I got to work out the letters and snap. I'm out of that experience.
Yeah.
I'm not there anymore. And a hard word like that, eventually, like if this is a book, I think, and so eventually, like I will come up with a pronunciation for that I like, and then I'll be able to roll past it.
Yeah.
But it takes me a long, long time to get there.
Yeah.
And so I like one of the like Merrick.
Mhm.
That's great, right? Because it's a little bit weird. Like I don't know a lot of Merricks. Merrick Garland is the only Merrick
I don't know any Merricks.
I don't know him personally.
Oh.
He was the attorney general, I think. So that's the only Merrick that I know. But nonetheless, I know the name. And so it feels otherworldly in a way,
Yeah.
but I can still pronounce it. Or I think one of the names of the land is called Amaranth.
Mhm.
I like that because
Yeah, that one's
that's a
close.
word that I otherwise know, but same story there. It feels otherworldly. So I recognize that I'm of the unpopular opinion that most fantasy is like mashing the keyboard, to come up with character names and place names and things
Get
like
some
that.
semicolons in there.
But if I can have any influence on the world of fantasy, I would love to see more names that are easier to pronounce for those reasons. So anyways, I guess tonight let's just pick a pronunciation for
Okay.
Dahiri.
Dahiri.
Okay, anyways, you were saying how much you like the story.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I thought that the story really flowed. I didn't think it was like forced when the Dahiri came and attacked.
Mhm.
And I had a real sense of like connection to the main character. I really wanted more, like not in the sense we were talking about, but like more as in like I want to read, I want to see where the story goes.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this is the first chapter, and one of the big tests that we run a first chapter through is when I get to the end, do I want to keep reading? Kind of back to that, I want more question. If it's a chapter one, we really need people to be saying, I want more, I want a lot more, I need more when we get to the end of the first chapter. And so for you, that's a pass.
Yes, I do want more.
What genre would you say this story is in? What are we working with?
I would say young adult. That would be my first like young adult fantasy.
Yeah.
Is what I'd go for. I really liked how it felt kind of Irish, with like the mountains and kind of the language you could see, and especially Patty, the character. I was like, oh yeah, we're in fantasy Ireland. I am all for it.
I like that line right in the beginning. And it's you lot's fault. That really brings a lot of voice to it.
An Irish accent.
Do you have a voice for that?
Nope.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Allie. I did felt like the piece had a good pace to it. It had a good flow to it. However, with the caveat that to me it does feel like YA clean fantasy. So if that's the intention, is to achieve like probably younger YA, I'm thinking like this is the ideal for like kid in that 12 to 16 year old boy range. If that's the target you're after, I think you're nailing it. And I think that at first I was a little skeptical of the pacing because we start on this really lighthearted, upbeat kind of note, but then it gets dark pretty fast, and we've got bodies in the roadway and things.
Dies.
Yeah. Wait, the cow dies?
Yeah. Didn't you notice with the barn?
Oh yeah, when the
the
moo that gets cut off. So we so we get dark pretty fast, and at first that gave me a little pause to just consider that are we finding a consistency to the story? Yeah. But overall, I think that we are. Okay, so with all that said, what do you think could be done better here?
I felt like some of the descriptions lost me just a little bit. So like
examples.
when he's running back down to the village and he's going through that switchback, I had to read that a couple times. And even after I read it a couple times, I don't feel like I could ever fully clearly picture it.
I'm with you there. Specifically on page 3, snap, the edge of a rock shelf gave way as Merrick jumped down onto it. He fell, landing on his shoulder and rolling down, tearing through the grass and heather. I get enough of it there that I understand the action. Like I understand that the rock breaks, he tumbles down the hill. And so like conceptually, you got me farther down the hill. However, like visually, it's difficult for me to parse all that and to figure out exactly what's happening. Like, so rather than having a specific image of this happening, I just have a generalized information that he got down the hill.
I don't know how far he is from the village at this point. I don't know in relation to like where he was, like how far up the hill he was.
Yeah.
I think that's like pretty important information to ground me.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And that was probably my biggest question throughout the piece is this, he's basically on this trek back to the village where the marauders, you know, are tearing things up. How long does that take? You know, at first it seemed to me this is going to be like, he's like a few minutes outside of the village. But as the story progressed, and especially he gets there and all the bad guys are gone, all the people are dead, nobody's moaning anymore in pain, like nobody's still in the process of dying or anything. It seemed to me that, well, it must have taken him some time, hours maybe, to get down into the village. So that was unclear. And so that clarity would have helped a little.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else?
I felt like some of the sentences were a little clunky and could have been improved upon.
Yeah.
Specifically on page 3 again, smoke swirled up from at least 20 fires. I really wanted to like feel that.
Yeah.
You know, and it felt a little like, oh, and smoke from at least 20 fires, you know, and I don't think that was the mood that we were going for.
Sort of academic, very information heavy.
Yeah.
And in one hand, I respect that because it does preserve the pace.
Yeah.
And I think that the pace here is what ties the beginning to the end, even though the mood shifts pretty dramatically. So I appreciate that, you know, we just sort of get this general statement, there's a bunch of fire, and that continues the pace at a pretty high velocity through the story. But I think you're right. At the same time, I want to see more opportunities taken to really build out strong visual descriptions in more instances. Cool. Anything else?
I don't think on my notes. What do you have?
No, that really covers it. You know, overall, this is a pass for me. Like in a good way, not like I'll pass, but like, you know, if I were giving this a letter grade, overall, I think that the right seeds are there. Again, with the caveat that I'm assuming that this is for like young adult fantasy. If that's the case, then I think all the right pieces are there. The answer when I get to the end of the chapter is yes. Like, let's keep going. I think I know what kind of story I'm reading, which I'm expecting like a vengeance tale. And we just see a note from Kinsey in the chat that she did intend it for that younger, I assume young masculine group, which is super cool then. So in any case, I assume that it's going to be like a vengeance tale, that he's going to become the warrior and, you know, avenge his family, in which case I'm here for it.
I do have one more note though, as we're thinking about it. I couldn't figure out how old Merrick was. I imagined him to be around 14 or 15, but there was nothing to really like clue me in solidly.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. And I'm with you. So for whatever reason, intuitively, I assumed 14, 15, maybe 13, you know, somewhere around there. But since we don't know the universe of the story well, I'm just making assumptions that it's like other fantasy universes, and that's when apprenticeships start. And so you're right there. We do lack a little bit of clarity. Good note. All right. Well, Kinsey, thank you so much for sharing it. You are a brave soul, and I appreciate you letting everybody read your stuff and listen to our critique. Good job. All right. So next we have Calvin Loses the Girl by Scott Morehead. So Alli, you want to read us the first 3 paragraphs there?
First 3. Okay. Missionary, send them, he said. An open cigar box with stacked postcards lay between us. The topmost, a city scene, contained a block print message ending with God bless you. The signature was eligible. Someone from college? I asked. A northerly wind creaked the thin kitchen walls, and rising from the hard chair, he rinsed a dish and pushed aside the curtain, surveying the dawn. He turned, and his pale blue eyes settled on the wall behind me. Connection becomes important when you're far from home.
Cool, thank you. And it's hard to read in public, but the line of the signature was illegible. That's
my bad.
Yeah, sorry. It does affect the clarity, so yes, I thought I should call it.
Yes, I appreciate that. My bad.
All right, so I'll get started on this one. Scott, thanks for sharing it with us. So I think, first of all, of all the stories in the stack, I think that this one has the most extremes. There's some really good stuff. There's some stuff in here that I absolutely love and I'm very impressed by. But then there's some other things that make it really hard to understand and have the clarity in the story that I want. So let's start with the good stuff. First of all, the voice that you achieve in the story is really well done.
Yeah.
I'm very impressed by the voice. It feels, it feels like it's written at the quality that I would expect, just as far as like the prose level writing. The fluency of the language is very strong. And not only is it strong, but there is also a specific voice that's being achieved that's sort of like terse yeah, it just has a very specific mood to the piece that I can appreciate. I also think that there's a lot of depth to the story. You are asking some questions in this story that are good questions. These are types of questions that you think about later when you're doing the dishes, when you're driving the car. And so I appreciate that you're willing to go to that depth, and you brought a lot of interestingness to the story. So I like all those things a lot. There's a lot going on here. However, in some ways, because of some of those things, the story suffers from a lack of clarity. So we have a frame story here where we open and close in one time and space, but then we flash back for the bulk of the story to a previous time and space. My biggest issue that I'll lead with here is in the outer frame. In the beginning and end, where we start in what is presumably the present day, there's just a real lack of clarity in those sections. In some ways, you're opening some story gaps. Like I'm asking good questions, like who are these guys? Like what's their relationship? What's going on? However, I don't totally get a resolution. Those gaps are never closed for me in the end of the frame. But more importantly, I'm also asking questions about like, wait, where are we?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of space is this? I feel like they're in like Siberia or something. Like, I imagine like, it's just like a wooden table and two guys and chairs with like a bottle of vodka in the middle, and so like but I'm basically making that up on my own because I have a lack of details in the story that help me to form a specific image. So I'm filling in a lot of this as I go, and I'm pretty sure that I'm wrong. And so, like I was explaining to one of my apprentices the other day, when you force your reader to make assumptions, well, whenever we make assumptions, we know in our hearts that we might be wrong. And so as those assumptions add up that I have to make, I start to feel uneasy and uncomfortable in the story. And because I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop and to find out that, oh no, actually we're in a New York City apartment or something like that. So that was the biggest detriment to the story for me, was just the lack of clarity. And even after we get that whole frame story with the bulk of the story and we come back, it doesn't answer my questions about who these guys are. I mean, it does answer my question about who they are. I understand who the characters are now, but like where they are now, or like why they're meeting and what the circumstances and kind of mood of this meeting is, I don't know. I can't tell if they're upset with each other or if they're old buddies that are kind of reconnecting. It's all very unclear to me. So, Alli, I have more notes, but I'll let you chime in there. What are some things that you see here?
I definitely agree with that. I have a note specifically on the third paragraph with that one really long sentence that starts, "A northerly wind creaked the thin kitchen walls."
Yeah.
I really get lost in all the information that we get in that sentence. I don't have room to kind of sit and breathe and picture where everything is.
And the interesting thing is there, and what I marked here, is that the prose is really good.
Yeah.
There's like something about the turn of phrase that's like really draws me in, is interesting and poetic and alive in a way, but it never resolves with that clarity where I know what's going on. It's like when you read a poem and you're like, oh, that was beautiful, but I have no idea what it was about. Yeah. That's sort of the feeling that I had with specifically the third and fourth paragraph there.
Yeah. I was really confused where the sink was when he rinsed the dish.
Yeah, that seemed to come out of nowhere.
Yeah, and I pictured him rinsing like the dish on the table, and then I had to stop, and I was like, that's not possible.
Yeah.
So I found that a lot through the manuscript. I also felt like it was, like I wasn't smart enough to read this piece. There were so many words that were used in a context implying something, which was beautiful. And I think that's the deeper story that we're really hearing. We're not necessarily hearing the words on the page, but what those words imply and what they mean.
Yeah.
And I got lost in a lot of that. Some of it I did catch, and I was like, oh, I can see it. That's great. But a majority of it lost me.
Yeah, I think that's really, really valid. And I don't think it's because you're dumb.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah, you're welcome. But one of the things that's interesting about this story to me is that I really want to relate to the characters on a human level. But the thing is, I really can't relate to them on a technical level. I like the experience that these guys are having where they're at some kind of posh university where you wear coats and ties and have the kind of relationship that they have. I don't know what that's like at all. I've never been in that environment. However, I'm certain that I can relate to them on a human level, on an emotional level, because I know what it feels like to be alone, to feel lonely. I know what it feels like to like a girl and not sure what the moral boundaries there are. I could relate to all of those things, but it's not quite giving me what I need to relate on that emotional level.
Yeah.
So really for me, like if I could have the piece excel in one thing, it would be that. Like how can you bring out that human element that is universally relatable, even as we have these kind of Holden Caulfield type of characters that just don't live in my world at all.
I feel like one section that this piece did really well in that was on page 7 at the bottom when he's talking to Mary in the diner. And she says, "You want this? It'll ruin the taste, but some customers can't help themselves." That was really clear.
Yeah.
The emotional stakes that were happening.
I really like Marie as a character.
Yeah, she was cool.
One of my favorite lines is when on page 8, it says, "I stood and reached for my wallet, placing a 10 on the counter. Do other people confess their sins here?" Marie cleared the plate and pocketed the bill. "Only the boys." Like, that's such a good line. That gave me so much to just pause and chew on and think about.
Ponder.
Yeah, I liked that. In relation to that, the moral complexity of the story, that's something we touched on in our conversation before we began. But so obviously there is a sexual scene, there's a sexual component to the story. And I'm okay with that, first off. I think that human beings have sex. It's a thing. It's a thing that people do. And so, like, as Christian writers, I think that we need to tackle that. You know, we should have thoughts on that. We should have things to share with the world. And in this particular case, like, it's not graphic. I don't have to, quote unquote, see anything, that would be inappropriate for me to see. And it turns out that when people have sex in inappropriate ways, it causes emotional hardship.
Yeah.
Like, it causes problems for their relationships, which is exactly what we see here. And so for those reasons, like, I don't think that this is an inappropriate use of sexual content. Alli, you're in a different demographic than I do.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
As I was reading it, I was like, uh-oh. But then I never had, at least in my opinion, a reason to be like, oh, there it is. It pushed me up to the line, but it didn't take me over the edge.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
And I think what you're saying is right. Like, the world talks about sex and the Bible talks about sex. So why aren't Christian authors talking about it?
Yeah. The one thing I would like to see more of in that regard, though, is to put it to more use. I really don't feel like we see the full payoff of that. Like, Joe is such a compelling character after that, in which he has this conflict in which Scarlett is ruined, by his ethos. The Scarlett is like ruined, but at the same time, he still wants her.
Yeah.
And he'd still do anything for her. And so there are some good questions that scene plants, but they don't really fully get realized. Like the story is more willing to go to the sex than it is to deal with the sex later. And so I'd love more emphasis, and again, more of that like human relatable level emphasis on that situation after the fact. I think that if you're gonna take the reader there, you have a responsibility to make it pay off in a big way. And so I want more of that afterwards. Other thoughts, Alli?
I think that's all I have. Let me look real quick. There was, and this might be just like a little like nitpicky detail, but it really threw me in on page 2 when he calls him professor. I was like, is he the professor?
Yeah,
Why
that
is
was
the professor
confusing.
hanging out with the student? What kind of school is this?
Yeah.
I know we hang out, but this is very this is a different kind of school.
Yeah, and I had a similar question when Joe pulls up in the car and the narrator just gets in. Like I didn't fully understand. They didn't seem to know each other that well, and the guy's like, "Get in,"
Right.
and he's like, "Okay, sure." Which I've been in college to some degree. I can understand that, but I just need about a half a step more to fully get it. And I think this draws back to the original thing I was talking about. That you have this really great, terse, kind of sparse voice that brings a really specific mood and really elevates the piece in so many ways. However, it's difficult to pull that off in the beginning of the piece.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to get the reader in because you're sort of being withholding with the details intentionally. And so finding that balance point of having that withholding terse voice, but still providing enough information for the reader to onboard into the story is really, really challenging. And in this case, we're too far into voice and I need more clarity.
Yeah.
I lose too much of the story. And frankly, I don't know that, like, if I found this in an anthology, I don't know that I would get this story. I think I would read the first page and be like, this is hard, and skip to the next story. The biggest way to solve that, I think, is even if you have to violate your sense of voice a little bit, take the time to set the scene in the beginning. So here, this is the second instance that I mentioned of beginning with a line of dialogue. And we have the same situation here. Missionaries send them, he said. And my first question is, who? And that's an interesting line. Like, it opens up story gaps. I want missionaries send what?
Yeah.
To whom, right? I have a lot of questions there. So it could work. But in this case, I don't know where I actually get the resolution of who says that line. It's not in the second paragraph. I guess in the third paragraph, I get he turned and his pale blue eyes settled on the wall behind me. Again, great line.
Yeah.
Beautiful prose. Awesome line. But it's just taking me way too long to make the connections, and you're losing and confusing me before I can really come to appreciate all of the prose. So start with setting the scene before you drop us into that line. Really let us get a sense of the space that we're in, the time that we're in. And I think that if you can do that and you can increase that human level connection to the story, once I get into the voice, I'm there. I'm for it. I'm probably more your demographic for the story than Alli is, in fairness. But like once you get me in, I'm glad I stayed. So if you can improve those elements, then I think it's really a solid story with a lot of depth that would it's like a stick to your guts kind of story. Cool. Any other thoughts for Scott, Alli?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I agree with what you said. It was very beautiful prose, for sure.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, in that case, we got one more.
Thank you very much, Scott, for putting that in there.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, guts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's important to say that. Thank you. All right, Alli. So we've got one more by Kamryn Weaver, which, as always, you can download this off the website, which you should take the time to do. You will get more out of this if you take the time to download the stuff, read it, and compare your thoughts and kind of your gut feelings to the specific feedback that we're giving.
Yeah.
So, Alli, how about down in the first two paragraphs there?
The first two. Okay. Whoosh, rip, crash. I sit bolt upright, jolted awake. Blending with the eerie wails of storm sirens from the nearby town, the sound is nightmare fuel for a resident of Tornado Alley. The walls to my room, covered in now flickering strings of LEDs, shudder as the gales beat against the house. The bookshelf on my wall crashes to the floor, and I jump up to gather my books when a blaring rip nearly deafens me. Instinctively, I drop and cover my head.
Excellent. Thank you, Alli.
You're welcome.
And so here we have two chapters, but they're very short chapters. So I'm assuming that this is the beginning of a novel, right?
Yeah.
All right. So what are some of your thoughts? What do you see here?
I enjoyed this piece quite a bit. I thought that a lot of the descriptions and the sounds that she has throughout the piece really pulled me in.
Mhm.
However, I also felt that some of the sentences were a little awkward and were a little hard to picture.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I could agree with that. I the premise building is interesting to
Mhm.
me. At first, I think it's a natural disaster story,
Mhm.
but then it becomes apparent quickly enough that there is like some kind of superhero element.
Mhm.
So I'm expecting like a junior X-Men
Yeah.
type of story out of
Mhm.
this. So if that's what comes next, then I think that, excuse me, I think that you sold the right type of story with this. Again, here I'm assuming that this is for a young adult audience, or perhaps even a middle grade audience. So it does not strike me as an appropriate piece for an adult audience for some of the reasons that you're mentioning. I mean, just the premise and the concept itself feels like a kid's story.
Yeah.
I could see this going as low as like the sixth grade for this particular story, or as high as like early high school, depending on how the story continues to develop from here.
Yeah.
But because of that, the general nature of the premise, but also some of the simplistic sentence structures and things like that. That's what I'm expecting. So, with that caveat, if that's what you're after, then I think that overall it's on the right track. If you are targeting an adult audience, mature audience, then there's more to be done with the writing.
Yeah.
Overall, probably my biggest note for improvement on the piece is to get more use out of the voice that you have.
Yeah.
So this is a first person story. It's told from the perspective of who I think the I was named Vanessa. Is that right?
Yeah.
So Vanessa is telling the story. And the advantage of using that first person voice is that you can have a lot of fun with the voiciness. That she can use really interesting phrases and slang and really draw me into how she emotionally experiences the story. Like the facts of the story don't even have to be accurate in the first person. I'm more interested in how she's experiencing them. However, the story reads at a very informational level. It's very perfunctory in the way that the narration is laid out now. So I'd love to see you take greater advantage of the opportunity of the first person voice to really make it fun, really like let me hear somebody's voice and it feel like I'm developing a connection.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things about that voice is you bring this whole new layer, a whole new depth to the story with the same information. But just by like utilizing a really specific voice, you make the story more than it was. So I'd love to get that deeper level out of this story.
Absolutely.
What else did you observe, Alli?
I found that I had a hard time picturing where things were, even though things were done in a very informational way. Besides the bookcase and the LED light strings, I'm like, where is she? Is she in her room? When the tornadoes take away, is she outside? Have they gone through the house? What's the house look like? These are the questions I'm like having a hard time grounding myself with.
Yeah.
In the beginning sections and throughout the story as she changes location.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And for me, again, if this is like for like an older middle grade audience, I think it works the way that it is, just because of the requirements of the age and the genre. Require that we keep things pretty simple.
Yeah.
So I think if that's the case, like you can get by with what you have here, but nonetheless, it'd still be better if we had greater clarity. There were some really good phrases in here. So I like this phrase a lot. Shifting the strands of winds at their sides as if they were wiry muscles rippling as they walked. That was cool. And your descriptions of the wind as being like humanoid were really effective. Like you gave me a clear visual that you didn't have to explain it. I was getting it, just from the visual that you provide, that there's something supernatural with this wind. There's something weird happening here. So well done in that regard. There were some other phrases that were confusing to me, though, like this one. Not wanting to attract attention, I head around the backside of the building, framing a deserted strip of pavement dotted with cigarette butts. I couldn't for the life of me figure out what that description meant. I mean, I get a general idea, but no specific image comes to mind there. And then in other cases, when we introduce the two guys, you do a really good job of providing a description, but it's almost too heavy-handed. It's like, pause, time out on the story. I'm about to provide some description here. And then we get, a couple of really deep paragraphs that are just description. So I'd love to see those descriptions woven more organically into the narrative of the story. And then finally, I think this will be my last note. There are a few things where there are just too many words, and it really detracts from your showing in the story. So for instance, on page 1, Mom is never scared, I think. This is bad. Like that, I think there. Earlier in the story, you established the convention that italics are thoughts, and you don't include a tag like I think. We just see italics, we understand that those are thoughts, and that works. But here you interject the I think, and it just really trips up the flow of the piece. A couple more examples of that kind of thing. Let's see, towards the bottom of page 3, Marco turns to look at Alex. What did I tell you? He says, and I can tell he's holding in, and I told you so. That second clause, and I can tell he's holding in, and I told you so, is really unnecessary. You've implied as much from the dialogue that we can see there on the page, and so it just muddies it up. Similar example, the last paragraph there on page 3. He catches me gazing up at him curiously. Curiously is confusing there, and it's unnecessary. As a general rule, watch out for adverbs in your work. They typically, if you have them, there's probably a better way to accomplish the same thing, or they're completely unnecessary. So here, curiously is ambiguous if it's talking about him, Marco, or Alex, I guess in this case, or if it is Vanessa who is looking up at him curiously. And really we can eliminate curiously altogether, and we don't lose anything out of the sentence. Just he catches me gazing up at him. I'm a smart reader. I'm pretty clued into the emotional context that's happening here. And so, I'm even going to come up with a better word than curiously in my own, parsing of the language if you leave that out. And then in a similar fashion on the next page, she doesn't know who we are, Alex says, seeing my hesitation. That seeing my hesitation is an unnecessary phrase. If you want to show us something, show us something. If her hesitation is important, let us see that. Like, what does hesitation look like for her? Is it body language? Is it she begins to open her mouth to speak and stops? Is it a confused look on her face? In which case I want to see, what does her confused face look like? Is she like a furrowed brow confused person, or like an open mouth confused person? Like, how does confusion for Vanessa manifest in her body and on her face? I want to see that, and that's going to anchor me to the story and give me so much more depth more effectively.
Absolutely.
Any other thoughts, Allie?
I was really confused if her parents were dead or not, and I don't know if that was intentional. I wasn't confused in a way of like, oh, I wonder if it's going to be a plot twist, her parents aren't actually dead. I was confused, like, what she saw and what happened to them.
Okay, yeah. I see. I had to review that, and I think on the first page there, it says, I watch Mom appear beside him as they begin to fight the storm. I stare in horror as the thing grows extensions that seem to be arms, wraps them around my parents, and pulls them into the wind as it turns red. I came back to that after I finished the piece, and I thought, well, is the red blood in the wind because they're dead? But I also felt like probably what's happening is it's intentionally ambiguous because they might come back later in the story.
Right.
But I don't know.
Yeah. She was just pushed into a tornado, so I didn't clue in like that being in a tornado was bad.
All right. Fair enough. Yeah. But it is ambiguous. Yeah. You're right. All right. Well, I do want to reiterate that, like, overall, I think the premise is cool. I think it fits into that young adult or upper middle grade superhero genre. I think there's a lot of space for that. I'm interested and curious to see how you're going to work in the biblical components of that with, I think it was Romans 12:21 that is cited there in the text. I'm interested to see. I feel like there's going to be a creative connection to the Bible, which a lot of Christian writing doesn't do very well, but this felt like it was going to be interesting in that way. So overall, like I think the premise is interesting. I do, again, assuming that I'm right about the intended audience, I think it's a keep reader right now. But there are a lot of opportunities to clean it up and, again, to increase the persistence of the voice and really making it more fun to get to know Vanessa just through the way that she talks and through the way that she uniquely tells a story.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Kamryn, for sharing your story with us. As we said with the others, it genuinely mean it. It takes a lot of guts to put yourself out there. I still do workshops with my work, and I get nervous every single time. Like my heart is like beating out of my chest. Even if it's people that I know well, it's always nerve-wracking for me to share my stuff. So really want to recognize you and all the others that took the risk to put your stuff out there and allow us to critique it for the benefit of the community. Well done. We appreciate you guys. All right, so that is the end of the ProCritique. I do want to encourage you to become a member of the company if you're not already, and specifically a paid member. So we are a ministry in what we do here. So we rely on memberships as well as our student tuition and some other sources to keep the lights on and keep doing what we do. So if you like what we do here, one of the best ways that you can support us is just become that $10 per month member. And you get access to some video courses like the Podcast Institute and Arc Year and some other things. We have a copy editing course that we'll be releasing very shortly that I'm excited about that will be added to that list as well. So you get access to all that stuff, but really even if there's not something there that's, interesting to you or that you want to take the course right now, just ask you kindly to become a member for $10 a month just to support the work that we do here, just to help us continue to fund things like the ProCritique and the anthologies that we produce and all the other opportunities, the writing contests and the workshops and the one-off classes and so many other ways that we support the community of writers. What's very cool is that we have some donors that aren't writers. They just see the value in what we're doing in providing opportunities for writers to learn more and transform the American media. And so they support what they're doing. I'd love to see the writers in our community stand up and support this mission at the same level as the non-writers who see the value in what we're doing. So if you're not yet a paid member, please consider doing that. It helps out a ton. So before we go, just a few announcements. Submit to Fantastical Summer. That is due on Thursday, so hopefully we get this produced and released even before that deadline. But fantasticalsummer.com, you can check out the submission requirements there. That's going to be a really cool anthology that's being put together by Kamryn. I love the cover. Go to fantasticalsummer.com right now just to check out the cover. It's really neat, and that's going to be a fun summer read for teenage girls specifically. So we're looking for short stories that support that end, and it's kind of a wide open box. If it's about summer and has some kind of fantastical, magical element, we want to read it. Even if you feel like your story isn't quite as polished as you want it to be, please submit it anyways. The kind of critique that we did tonight, we're going to be doing that with all the stories that are accepted to the anthology. So we're really not expecting anything to come in perfect and ready for publication. Instead, we want to see the seed. We want to see the potential of the story, but then we're going to work with you to make it the best that it can be. So if you feel like it's not there yet, submit it anyways. You literally have nothing to lose. In other news, next month, we're going to be doing a short story workshop where we're going to take a short story by Roald Dahl called Lamb to the Slaughter, and we'll be kind of doing the same thing that we did tonight, but we'd love to incorporate you in that discussion, and then I'll teach a little bit from the story, some of the techniques that we can observe in the story. So keep your eye out on the company newsletter and on the website and social media for details about that. We'd really love for you to be a part of that. And then tentatively, we'll do another ProCritique 2 months from now. So keep your eye out for details about that as well if you'd like to submit your piece. And of course, we'd love to critique it for you. So, Alli, did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
All right. In that case, let's pray just love to bless you. Whoever's listening today or in the future, just love to bless your writing. So, Alli, will you pray a blessing over
Absolutely.
these invisible writers?
Of course.
Thanks.
Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much for this opportunity that we have to gather together and just talk about creativity and writing. Lord, though we may not be able to see these writers, you see these writers, God. And I ask that you would just bless their career, that you would bless their writing, God, that you would just bring it, that you would bring their writing to the next level, God, that you would bring them deeper into relationship with you through this craft, Lord Jesus. I ask that you would reassure them that what they're doing is important and that the stories that they have on their heart are worth sharing, Lord. And in your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Alli. All right. Well, with that, it's been lovely to hang out with you. If you ever want to get more involved around here, check out the website. We've got a ton of stuff going on, including our full-time apprenticeship, which we'd love to have you apply to. So until we see you next time, be blessed and happy writing.
Happy writing.
See ya.
Thank you so much for listening today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen and leave us a review. This podcast was produced by Theo Pauquette with help from the company. For help with your podcast, visit writers.company. We'd love to give you a hand.